Hello and welcome to this episode of the P&E podcast. My name's Jack Jacob and I am your host. In this episode, I talk with Richard Stubbs, who's the CEO of Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health Science Network. We talk about how Richard grew up in the mining community in South Yorkshire and how he is the first of 4 generations not to go down to the pits. Richard fell in love with golf at an early age, looking up to Tiger Woods as his hero, almost giving him, a mixed race kid in a white working class community, permission to play. After studying politics and economics at university, where he contributed heavily to student radio, Richard worked at the BBC, which he values as an experience teaching him a lot about leadership and making the impossible happen. Wanting to do something he really cared about, he joined the NHS graduate scheme, where since he's had an 18-year-long career. Richard provides insight on the diversity conversation, sharing his personal thoughts on racism and unconscious bias, as well as his views on wider issues highlighted by George Floyd and the pandemic. Please do enjoy this episode as we get to know the person behind the job title. This episode of the P&E podcast is sponsored by the virtual HPN Expo. The virtual HPN Expo will be taking place across the 17th and 18th of November on a state-of-the-art virtual events platform. The event will be CPD accredited and will host over 1,000 delegates across the 2 days. There'll be 40 exhibitors, 80 speakers addressing 1 main auditorium room and 4 breakout theatres, with the exhibitors being hosted across 4 exhibition zones. There'll be key themes around health inequalities, diversity and inclusion, workforce and well-being, AI and RPA, telehealth and virtual care, and improvement and innovation. We'll also be touching upon culture and leadership. To register as a delegate or to inquire about exhibiting, please visit our website, which is www.virtualhpnexpo.com. Richard, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And ultimately, we'll spend, hopefully, the next 45 minutes to an hour getting to know you and the person behind your CEO job title. And that's really what the series is about. It's getting to know senior leaders from across the public sector and who they are and the values that they have. So welcome. And let's start at the beginning for you then. So talk to me about your childhood. Where did you grow up and what did you want to do growing up?
Thanks, Jack. And hi, it's great to be here. So yeah, I'm in childhood. So I grew up in God's own county. So I grew up in Yorkshire, in South Yorkshire to be specific. And I'm from a very small mining village called Maltby, which is part of the wider Rotherham area. So I grew up in that pit village. My family on my dad's side, I come from a background of miners. So 4 generations of miners before me. I was the first one not to be heading down the pit. And my mum is originally from Jamaica, and she came over to England to be a nurse. So a really diverse, I suppose, family background in a pretty undiverse place to grow up. Which, of course, when you've only got one example of or one scenario to kind of work from, it feels pretty normal. Everything feels pretty normal when it's your only reference point. So I had a pretty pretty normal upbringing for anybody from a pit village. But I think looking back on it now, I think I can see the way or the kind of the way in which I grew up, or the environment in which I grew up through other people's eyes, and perhaps seeing more of what it looked like from an outsider's perspective.
Amazing. So you grew up in Yorkshire, and what about school? Was you academic growing up, or the opposite?
I was pretty academic. I was a nerd. I was pretty much a nerd. So I was always very good at maths and things like that. I think teachers would probably say, listening to this now, they'd probably say, yeah, probably didn't push himself as hard as he could do. And they're probably right. But yeah, I was kind of naturally able to kind of get comfortable with academia, and was always competitive as well. I've always been really competitive. So I've been competitive academically as much as I've been competitive in a sporting life. So didn't do too bad.
What sports were you into growing up?
Oh, football. Yeah,
football. Yeah. So you a Leeds fan?
A Leeds fan.
Are you a Leeds fan?
Oh, Jack, no. Sheffield Wednesday all the way. Always has
Oh,
been.
there we go. So, well, I was going to say, I would, if you were a Leeds fan, you'd be very happy right now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's not.
but
This is not a topic I'm willing to. Did my agent not tell you I'm not willing to talk about Sheffield Wednesday on the podcast? It's
I was going to say
come
you
back to
support
me
the
in a
wrong
year's
Sheffield,
time.
don't you?
Yeah, it's not a good time. Leeds hasn't helped. But yeah, I was always into football, played football relentlessly, and then golf as well. Actually, when I was 11, I started to play golf, which was really interesting because Tiger Woods is one of my heroes, and he almost gave me permission to play. It was really noticeable that someone like Tiger playing golf gave someone like me permission to play golf, and so yeah, I still am a massive.
Why'd you say that? Why'd you say permission to play? Because it was
I think when
so
you because
heavily white players.
yeah, when you come from when you're a mixed race kid in a white working class bit of the country, I think, and you're always going to be the only non-white golfer, even as a junior in any golf course that you happen to join. Having the best player in the world also being from a mixed race background and being as visible as Tiger was at that time, is really, really important and something that I do often think. It gave me, and not that I needed to give myself permission, but it felt like I didn't have to justify why I was there because the best in the world is also from a mixed race background.
Yeah, makes sense. We'll move on to the diversity agenda in a bit, but we'll talk more about that and perhaps some of the challenges you faced. But I watched that Tiger Woods documentary only a couple of weeks ago, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and his comeback is just special, incredible.
Yeah. I watch it with my kids, and it's one of the best sporting stories I think of this whole last century. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you watched the Michael Jordan one on Netflix?
I have.
As well. That I watched that all in a day. It just had me. It had me. It was like a Sunday. I put it on at I thought, I'll put this on, and I thought, watch an episode or two. Ended up just not leaving the sofa, and watched all of it in one day.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's also, we were talking about the fact that actually for us now, sports documentaries almost seem better than sport itself. It's just, the stuff that's on at the moment is just extraordinary. But also it's a story of leadership as well. And there's the leadership story from the parables that you can take from that documentary are immense, I think.
100%. So what did you want to do growing up then? Because, looking at your career history and kind of some of the post-interview research on you've worked, for the BBC, you've worked across the public sector. Was it always that vision you had, or was there something different you wanted to do?
I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I think, again, thinking about growing up in Maltby, you didn't have careers advice as we'd probably expect it to be now. There was a sense of, well, you've got the pit over here, you've got these shops on the high street, and that was probably the extent of my knowledge about what was available. I always remember wanting to be an architect, but I can't remember why I wanted to be an architect. I think it's just because I realized that architects existed. And so no, I had no clue at all. And actually, when I went to university, I deliberately chose a degree I went to the politics, philosophy, and economics at York. And the only reason I chose PPE was because it sounded like the kind of degree for somebody who's not made their mind about what they want to do. So it very much felt, do this and you've still got options. You can work it out later. I just didn't feel like doing the kind of degree that sets you on a particular rigid path, because I had literally no idea what I wanted to do.
Sure. So was your first job at the BBC, or did you have one before that?
No, that was the first job. So I finished, I suppose, my path was that, so I went to university, 3 years, obviously, PPE, loved the course, loved university. Didn't expect this, but I fell into student radio when I was at university. And after 3 months of being at university, my first year, I ended up becoming the station manager of what's called University Radio York, or URY, which is a student radio station for the university. And ran that station for 3 years. So I was station manager for 3 years, had my own show, which, is part of it, but actually fell in love with media as a medium, radio in particular. And also actually, when I look back, I kind of realized I also at that point started to fall in love with the idea of management and people and leading teams and making things happen through people. And loved being station manager. I mean, probably too much, because I think it took me away from my degree a huge amount. I think I could probably say that now. Sorry, Mom. But yeah, I spent 3 years doing that job and doing my degree on top. And so I came out of university thinking, well, I know enough now from the running a student radio station, but also by then having done loads of work experience, so Minster FM, which is the local commercial station up there, and also BBC Radio York, obviously, had done enough radio experience to know that that's something I wanted to do. So I started knocking on the door to the BBC in the most unproductive, unknowing way. And I think, for me, it was a life lesson, but I basically spent a year back at home, waiting every Monday for the Media Guardian to come out at the time. And that would come out with various jobs in the back pages. I'd apply for every single one of them, send off the CV, not hear a thing back, not really have a clue why nothing was working. And I think, and at the same time, trying to do as many work experience jobs as I could. So I ended up doing some independent films that were happening around Sheffield at the time, and doing other bits and bobs where you could, and trying to build that CV up, and a bit of journalism at the time as well.
Yeah.
Basically, I got into the BBC through pretending to know something about, at the time, what was then defined as Afro-Caribbean culture.
Okay.
So the BBC had an Afro-Caribbean unit, and I was offered 4 weeks of work experience there. And as far as I was concerned, I was a kid from a pit village in the north of England. I probably knew a little bit more than my peers, but not much. Sure. But that was the cliched route in. I was seen as somebody who fits that particular box. So I grabbed it, and I decided, well, this could have been any subject matter at all. And my job would have been to get into it and find out more about it. So I think that was the beginning of my understanding of that as from a diverse point of view. So clung on with my fingernails, and yeah, the BBC was my first job. Managed to get my way through 4 weeks of work experience. Managed to get a paid job, I think a 6-week contract. Spent my entire time at the BBC alternating between 6-week and 12-week contracts, and ended up working in television more than radio, actually, because there are just more jobs in TV. But I did I absolutely loved it. I love making live TV. I love that sense of you're going to put the show on right here. And actually, I also saw the BBC as a bit of a finishing school. Again, it's kind of hindsight stuff. It was pretty rocky at the time. The management wasn't great. We didn't do a good job of taking people from being producers or senior producers and then making them managers of people, which I kind of realize now. But at the time, you just think, I don't get on with my boss. But actually what you realize is there was actually a pretty bad culture and a pretty bad level of how you manage people at the BBC. But what there was an incredibly competitive, absolutely can-do type of culture. So one of the things it really taught me was, to a certain extent, there's no such word as no. If somebody says, in entertainment and features and the kind of shows I was making, lots of daytime shows, things like that. If somebody says, I need 2 chihuahuas and a cowboy hat, and we're going live in 5 minutes, you find a way to make it happen. And I think that kind of, how do I make this impossible task happen, is something that I took into the NHS when I joined the NHS. But it was absolutely kind of almost a subtle, far too subtle, kind of almost subconscious kind of development of, this is how you excel. You just say yes, and then you work out how to do it later.
Yeah. There's that famous Richard Branson quote, isn't there, about, someone offers you a job and you don't know how to do it, say yes and work out as you're doing it, or words to that effect. Exactly. I'm sure the way he says it's probably more punchy than the way I said it. But so how did you go then from BBC researcher, senior researcher, that kind of stuff, to then NHS graduate management program?
Yeah, so and it's a question I have to answer this quite a lot, and for me it's completely linked, because I see the BBC and the NHS as almost the same organisation. I mean, they're kind of much loved 3-letter acronyms, part of the religion of the country, but also hugely bureaucratic, quite political kind of organisation. So I saw them as similar, actually. But for me, the difference was having spent 4 years, maybe more, at the Beeb and Granada actually as well, working on shows that to be honest, didn't float my boat. I mean, they were incredibly hard to make, and a huge amount of talent went into making those shows. But actually, I had no interest in the end product, and that was fine while it was fun, and it was a lot of fun to work in television. Still is. But I started to think more about how much I cared about the end product, and that's what made me think about a career change. And I had no intention of joining the NHS until that kind of light bulb moment of, I need to do something where if I'm going to put this kind of hard work in every day, I want to do something that I care about. I want to do something that makes a difference. And actually, it wasn't the NHS as much. It was the graduate scheme that I didn't know graduate schemes existed. It wasn't something that had been presented to me at university. I wasn't part of those kind of circles of milk rounds and things like that. They just weren't opportunities that were given to me. So I was 25, I guess, before I realized that the notion of a graduate scheme and what it was all about. Fell in love with the NHS graduate scheme, desperately wanted to get on it. And I suppose it was a graduate scheme that then brought me to the NHS. So I worked really, really hard, actually, and probably still one of the greatest things I think I've ever done is getting on the graduate scheme. I still remember, where I was when I got the phone call to say I've been successful, and it even felt at that moment, that this was a life-changing moment, and I've never regretted it. So came into the NHS on that basis, and then I suppose fell in love with the scheme first, and then fell in love with the NHS not too long after that. And I've absolutely loved it. And this, we're talking now. This is now 18 years ago, but and I've done a very varied career, as you know. But yeah, love the place.
Good, amazing. So, talk to me about then that kind of progressive journey from going into as a graduate management trainee through to then chief executive now of Yorkshire and Humber YHAHSN.
Yeah, it sounds like a really smooth escalator, doesn't it? And it's
well, there's 18 years you've got to fill in, to be fair. But
I mean, I still can't believe I'm here, to be honest. And I had no intention of this kind of job. I think when I started, I don't think I wasn't really looking beyond that. I think, given my experience of working in Manchester in the BBC and having like 12-week contracts be the length of your kind of thought process, coming to the graduate scheme and having a 2-year contract felt like an absolute lifetime. And I took it kind of one step at a time after that. I mean, as I finished the scheme in 2004, I did kind of what you'd call kind of the usual kind of graduate scheme, ex-graduate scheme jobs. I was working in Sheffield at the time. I got a job at Doncaster in Doncaster Bastille Hospitals, working on Choose and Book back in the day, and then managed to get myself a promotion to be head of business development. And it's very much so far so normal. I think for me, two things changed for me. Two big points. One was a return to training and development. So I'd done the scheme, obviously, loved that for 2 years, had 4 years off the scheme, working in Donny and Bastille and loving that too. But then something called the Top Talent program came along, the Breaking Through program, which Yvonne Coghill, who's obviously a legend, Yvonne had set up, and it was for people like me, middle management, BAME leaders, future leaders, I guess, who wanted to prove their ability. And what the Top Talent program did was basically say, if you're good enough to get on it, we will put you into a significantly more senior role than you're currently doing, and B, we'll see what you do, and you'll either swim or sink. And it was pretty ballsy, I think, of Yvonne to do that, but it gave me the ability to genuinely prove my worth on a bigger stage, and that was a massive inflection point to my career, and everything that's happened since, I kind of put back to that moment of being on the Breaking Through program. Yeah. But the second one was kind of happened almost at the same time, which was that there was something being created called the National Leadership Council, which was kind of a forerunner to what is now the Leadership Academy. Yeah. And the Leadership Council was the pretty standard, great and good, top of the office, senior management and leaders of the NHS and the Department for Health executive coming together to say, we want to work on our people and our workforce and our leadership. But what they did, which was fantastic for people like me, was they said, and we're going to have 5 places on this council for people who would consider to be aspiring future leaders. So a manager, a nurse, an AHP, a mental health clinician, and a medical doctor. And I don't know how I managed to get myself to be on that council as kind of the aspiring manager type of representative. And again, that just was a huge experience for me. And I remember every meeting, every conversation, every point of that National Leadership Council, and it was an opportunity for the first time in my career to be in those kind of rooms where you start to soak everything up and you start to realize who people are, how things are happening, how to operate, how hopefully not to embarrass yourself, but I'm sure I didn't manage that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, to get a taste for this felt good. This felt like the kind of room where I wanted to be. And I think chiefly what it did was it said, you're now on show. And that can be both a positive or negative. And if it's a positive, it's kind of up to you. And if it's a negative, it's kind of going to be down to your fault as well. But it gave me the opportunity to be noticed, and it gave me the opportunity to start putting my hand up to other stuff.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden then, there was an opportunity for...
Before you move on to that, I want to ask a couple of questions around that. You don't fall into those things. That doesn't happen by accident. So I know you said you don't know how you got on there, and similarly with the management trainee program and then this. What do you feel you showed to get you on that? Because I assume there was leadership qualities that shone through from a young age from yourself that other people may have noticed before you necessarily noticed.
Jack, on that note, I don't know. I mean, what I would say, what did I do to get on there? The thing I learnt, or the thing I brought the most, I think, was my experience of trying to get into the BBC. Was that sense of tenacity and sharp-elbowedness. In the end, the only way that a boy from a pit village in South Yorkshire got into the BBC was to stop thinking that cold CVs and job applications to people you don't know were going to make any difference, and to start thinking, who do I know who works at the BBC? And of course, the answer was literally nobody. But actually, we did the whole 6 degrees of separation thing, and my mom, who by then was a very senior executive nurse, she knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and it was literally six links down this chain. Somebody said, I know somebody who works in the BBC. I will try and get them to read a letter, and that's when you get your tentative first foothold. And and we'll come on to this later, I'm sure, but one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about leveling up the North and I've got 2 kids and I want them to find careers in the North is because I was really naive back then. I almost certainly am still very, very naive, but I do now recognize that for some people, some families, some places almost, they have an ability to reach out on these opportunities, and their 6 degrees of separation is more like 1 link in the chain rather than 6. And that, for me, when you start to recognize how these opportunities present themselves, then you start to think, well, do I join that game or not? And so when it comes to things like the National Leadership Council, that was where my thinking was. It was very much on, I know how this game is played. So it's not just a bog standard letter application to somebody that I never met. It's a phone call, it's an email, it's a lobbying position, it's anything. But, and maybe it's just a case of saying, I just need this kid to shut up, so I'll let him in. I don't know, but eventually you manage to get a break, and I think it was a massive break for me to get onto them. I'm not sure how many other people even knew that the opportunity was there. I'm not sure how many people applied. I am still literally amazed that I managed to get in there. But certainly the strategy I deployed was the strategy of, I can't do what I did. I can't be naive to think that this is an open field and you just put your letter in, they read every letter, and then it's the best person. You've got to do more.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when you started, I assume, to then form wider connections and say, right, how do I, win friends and then start that process where they can influence where I go next and kind of, I suppose, lessening that 6 degrees, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And certainly the things that followed for me immediately after that were as a direct result of being in that room, and also being, back to the Richard Branson stuff, being stupid enough to say, yeah, I'll do that. I've got no idea what it is, but and this is where you get into a position of, you think back in your life and you think, well, I hated it at the time, but I'm kind of glad that my entire life at the BBC was on 6-week, 12-week contracts, because all of a sudden I'm not afraid of a fixed term contract. I'm not afraid of, we've got 12 months work and then we've got no idea what's next for you, Richard, because actually it still felt like a lifetime. It still felt like I can do something with that. I've got less to lose, less to give up, if you like. And 12 months, that's fine. I can find another job in 12 months time. So all of a sudden then being asked by, top of the office to say, well, we've got this thing called the Innovation Challenge Prizes, and we've got this thing called NHS Global. Do you want to take them on? And, that BBC say yes, make it happen, you'll find a way, coupled with that lack of fear of, it's not a permanent contract, I don't know where I'll be in 12 months time, gives you the opportunity to put your hand up and say, yeah, I will, I am nervous as hell, but I'll take it on and I'll give it a go. And you just have to run with it. And for me, I very much saw, this is one of those moments, it's your big, it could be your big break, it could be the last job you do in the NHS, but at least you'll go down trying. But what you're going to do if you don't say yes? So I said yes to kind of getting into the Department for Health and doing, creating this thing called the Innovation Challenge Prizes, which was all about innovation, as you can imagine, but it was also all about how do we better recognise and reward our staff who are going above and beyond to create things, adopt things, spread things. And then also at the same time, I did this thing called NHS Global, which was all about how does the NHS find its international market? What do we have to sell, to export, that would be of value overseas? And how can we possibly do that without destabilising the care that we're giving to our local residents and communities?
Of course. Yeah, makes sense. So for me, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, you must have some sales skills there as well then, because you talked about a head of a business development role, or a business development role within was it Doncaster and Basildon, you said?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I can't imagine that was out and out sales, So what does that mean actually? Because I see that job title pop up, but what does an NHS business development manager do?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know what they do now. I can tell you what I did. And so we were a first wave 3-star foundation trust in Doncaster, and had been for a few years before I came along. And yet, got to cast your mind back to 15 years ago, so maybe even more now. But I think there was a sense that foundation trust status means a lot. We have these new freedoms. We're not sure what that really means for us from a commercial point of view. You've got I can't even remember the name of it. I want to say payment by results, but it wasn't. Practice-based commissioning. Practice-based commissioning. Okay. So patient choice is a massive thing now. So in that era, a lot of my job in that role was about how do you shore up your current GP referral market? How do you work with GPs in Doncaster, Worksop, and the surrounding area to make sure that they see and trust us to be the place for their patients? How do you make sure you kind of win, in quotation marks, on the patient choice agenda? And potentially, how do you get into a market share kind of battle? It's the NHS couldn't have come a full 180 more than that if it tried, can it? Thinking about today's world of integration, but that certainly was the world.
Sure. So it was more about being commissioned on whether operations that were needed or different services within the hospital.
It was more about, it was that. It was about saying, look, patients have a choice. The choose and book system and the conversations with their GPs are going to mean that they're going to think about what motivates them to choose a hospital. And yes, you could probably say that for a huge proportion of those patients, they will go local, they'll stay where they know, they probably have friends and family who work at the local hospital, and that might influence them as well, positively or negatively. No one knew how transformational the patient choice agenda would be, but it got you thinking, how do we improve? How do we make sure that we at least shore up and safeguard our share of the population? And that led to a quality improvement kind of mindset. So, it made you not be complacent about the look and feel of the hospital when you walked in, the state of the car parking, the the kind of customer service or not that we had when people telephoned. And I think as an NHS organisation, we hadn't really thought those things through previously. You know, what is our offer to patients as and to carers and to families as they engage with us as an organisation? You know, when they walk in, how does it feel? When they phone us and we answer, how does it sound? So all those kind of subtle customer service orientated improvements, I think, came about as a result of the patient choice era.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. So then we'll fast forward a little bit and to your current role then. So you're Chief Executive Officer of Yorkshire and Humber YHAHSN network. What was that like, that moment that you got that chief exec role?
I think the only way I can equate it is to go back to how I felt when I got on the graduate scheme. Actually, it was exactly the same. And I think again,
do you suffer with imposter syndrome?
Do I suffer from imposter syndrome? No, I'm not good enough to suffer from imposter syndrome. No, I think, do you know what? I mean, I absolutely did. And not just imposter syndrome, but also this sense of, this is it for me. I think the BBC instilled on me, gave me good things, gave me bad things. One thing I took from the BBC was this constant sort of Damocles way of working, this sense of the axe will fall every day. Every phone call is a bad phone call until you realize it's not a bad phone call. And I think I've always suffered from that sense. And I think fixed term contracts, being from a BME background, seeing other people get opportunities, it can't help but instill in you this sense of borrowed time. So there's a really important quote from Samuel L. Jackson, which I absolutely believe and take to heart, which is, and I'm not going to be able to get every word right, but what Samuel L. Jackson basically says is, I've had to be 4 times as smart and work 8 times as hard to be seen at the level of my peers. And that is something I completely believe. So that's how it's always felt. So
talk to me about those difficulties then that you face personally. Talk to me about how ultimately your race has made things more difficult for you to get to the top or achieve more or be seen as equal to peers.
Yeah, and I think this is even that question is really interesting because it's incredibly difficult and very uncomfortable, but it's incredibly difficult, I think, as an individual, unless you've had any overt experience of clear and obvious racism. It's incredibly difficult as an individual to put any negative decision that's been made about you down to something that's true. All you can do is look at the wider numbers and statistics, particularly around senior leadership in the NHS, and say, there is clearly something there. There is clearly an issue. The res data and other types of analysis will say, we have a problem on this. And therefore you can kind of bring it back to that individual and say, I don't know where it is. I can't tell you that these were the meetings or these were the conversations, but I can tell you it has to be there. Otherwise, the metadata wouldn't make any
of course.
So I've always really struggled to say, let me list for you the reasons why I have been denied opportunity. And I think you can tie yourselves in knots. And I think people like me do tie ourselves in knots, actually. Second guessing, overanalyzing, and just being left in a very confused state when you've had an interaction or a decision go against you, because you're never quite sure what this really means.
Sure.
And feedback or people's reasonings are always justifiable. Sometimes they're weaker than others. But a personal view, I guess, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but I always feel that it's not for me to assume discrimination on an individual level and on an episode by episode level. You just have to know it's there. So you just have to accept that even if you've not seen it, even if as is quite likely, you're not actually in the room where those conversations are taking place. Even if, and this I think is incredibly likely, the people making those decisions aren't even aware of their own bias.
Yeah.
So nobody in the room believes that racism is happening, but it is.
Yeah. So it's unconscious ultimately. And it's that unconscious bias. And obviously there's, you know, there's things that programmed in place to now tackle unconscious bias, right? And I have to, you know, tackle my unconscious bias. And you know what, as well, and we spoke before off air. You know, I think this whole conversation around race and diversity and inclusion and being, you know, equal opportunities and so on is such an uncomfortable conversation for certainly I feel, as white men as a whole, or white people as a whole, because it's a case where, and even now I'm second guessing myself, making sure I don't say anything wrong. And this is the whole point, is that it's an uncomfortable conversation because I don't know what's offensive and what's not offensive. And we sat down at dinner last year, I think it was, when we went to the to Confed, and we sat down and had a nice meal together. And I said to you, you know, is it the fact that I'm conscious that, right, I need to make sure that I get a certain amount of people of color onto my event agendas, for example? Is that in itself? Is that, and you said, no, that's a good thing because you're conscious about it. And I was like, well, I don't, you know, is it a case where I shouldn't be thinking like that? It should be natural. And I think it's such a difficult thing to talk about because it's a very, very uncomfortable conversation for the reasons I've just mentioned. You know, people don't want to put their foot in it or their mouth in it,
No.
And say the wrong thing.
No, and I think as we talked about off air, the acknowledgement and awareness of the complexity and the uncomfortableness is in itself a step forward. And I think that, if nothing else, the conversation that's happened because of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, and the health inequalities that have always been present but have been starkly revealed, have changed the nature of the conversation. And not in all communities, I'm well aware of that. And I think some nights I cannot go near Twitter because of the stuff that's on there. But certainly I think for most people, it's changed the nature of the conversation. It's become a conversation of questions rather than statements. And I think that's a much better place to be. And if we can just keep asking ourselves those kind of questions, then we'll get into a dialogue, which I think ends up in the right place. But the point you mentioned about panels and things like that, I mean, the same can be true about positive action, you know, recruitment and other things, and quotas and types of, you know, button issues that can, you know, really provoke outrage in some parts of society. And I think I don't even know how I feel about aspects of those. It's something I think about often. And I guess, you know, I'd start by saying, I'm not a spokesman for the BAME generation. You know, I'm not a race relations expert. I just happen to be somebody who's mixed race. It took me a while to realize it's not my job, but I think that's what we are also talking about now. It doesn't have to be my job. If you think about the ways that I go into the BBC through the Afro-Caribbean unit, you know, it's probably not a way that would be deemed suitable or appropriate now to say, well, the black guy can only get in if you can find a black job to go and do. But that's what I had to do. But now I realize that I don't have to be the diversity candidate, and I don't have to be the diversity leader. Now that's in a tension with the other part of me that says, but people need role models, people need leaders. You're now in a privileged position, so you have to be able to speak. And I think I try and balance those tensions. But I think it's about saying, you know, we need better allyship. We need better white allies. We need something called non-optical allyship, where white people are allies and doing general good that helps to support and improve the agenda, without necessarily using it as a vehicle or a bandwagon to promote their own profile. And I think if you look on social media in particular, you can see people who clearly have an optical allyship to this. You know, it is more important for me to be using the right hashtag. It is more important for me to be seen to be somebody who is supportive, but actually my actions which are the only things that really matter, equate to not very much of very little. So it's a really, really complicated field. But I guess, coming back to this panels issue, the one thing I'd say, and I thought about this a lot, is in an ideal world, we wouldn't be selecting any panel based on gender balance or racial balance, because we'd generally be saying, who are the people that we want to be able to speak on this topic? But it's not an ideal world, and we have to recognize that there are people who have credible voices on this subject, but because of the unconscious bias, because of the lack of a level playing field that we've spoken about, their voices aren't heard, their names don't come to people's mind. So we have to think hard, and we have to think deeper, and we have to be able to say, have I actually given my all to think, though, who are the most credible speakers to speak on this topic, and actually uncovered areas or networks that I've not necessarily tapped into automatically to find out other very credible voices and to give them a platform, rather than think, these are the first four names that spring to mind. Because it's my network, because I have an unconscious bias at play, they're going to be the names of four white men. And I think that's the difference. It's about saying, it's not about saying it's not a meritocracy. It's about recognizing that by definition, we have our own networks that are probably predisposed to look like us. And if we don't proactively think about other networks, then we're going to be denying people a voice.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. Well, thank you for that insight. And it's such an interesting topic and such a sensitive topic. But and again, we spoke of you recommended me a book, Why I Stopped Talking to White People About Race. And again, and anyone listening to this, I urge you to read that, because I think it gives good insight into, the fact that, what I kind of got from it is that, I can't understand what people, the BAME community has gone through, because I'm not BAME, and I have these automatic unconscious privileges, and I have to be aware of that. And I think that's really probably the first step of just becoming conscious about it, because you had the whole all lives matters, white lives matters, and all that stuff. And I think that ultimately, and I think everyone gets this, people are missing the bloody point, basically. And so, but like I said, it's a sensitive subject, and it's one that needs to be approached sensibly.
And all lives do matter.
Of course.
But you put out the house that's on fire. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly that. And Sir Michael Holden, he done a great speech before a cricket match, and really powerful, really powerful. And I think that he summed that up really nicely. And that it's not a movement. It's not an anti-white movement. It's unconsciously, that's where kind of white people are at, and it needs to be brought up to a level playing field. And that's how I understood it anyway. And so yeah. But anyway, right. Let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about, some of your, so you talked about, some proud moments for you in your career, and how that was, getting into these kind of management trainee programs and other things. Are there any other highlights for you career wise, some major highs for you, maybe in your personal life as well?
Yeah. I mean, huge highlights in my personal life, not football as discussed. We'll not talk about football, but yeah, I mean, I've got, I'm married to a beautiful wife, and we are childhood sweethearts. So we've been together since we were 18. We've got two beautiful kids who are absolutely amazing in every way, and in many ways, I am living the dream. I love my job. I love my family. I love my home life. It is just spot on. And I think the other thing though that I've really started to get a lot of enjoyment out of is the non-work work. So I've become a non-exec director of a few things, and actually I've started to get a huge amount of pleasure from that. So I think the thing that gives me pleasure, the most pleasure, I think, outside of my job, I suppose, that I'm paid for, is I'm a board member of something called a local enterprise partnership for Sheffield City region, which is basically the economic growth board, the private sector growth board for the region. And that again has just opened my eyes to a different environment, a different set of political leaders, and particularly us having a metro mayor here in Sheffield, and the ability to start to influence on economic regeneration post-COVID, the infrastructure build of our urban areas in Sheffield, Rotherham, Barnsley and Doncaster, to work on the environmental strategy and zero carbon, and start to think, how can I grow jobs? And I joined that board particularly because, as I said to you earlier, I was really passionate about the levelling up agenda and the fact that it's taken me doing this job in the YHAHSN to realise what the South East actually has, not just London, outside London as well, compared to what we have here. And and I'd say it's made me pretty angry, to be honest, to say that, there is just a polarisation of high value jobs that need to be spread out more. And the LEP job gives me an ability to literally roll my sleeves up and make that happen. So I'm really quite
And do you
pleased with the
think,
work.
and do you think actually, the whole COVID period where now video conferencing and working from home and, you can work anywhere, anytime will help to level that playing field, because there is not a need for jobs to be in the home counties of London that can make train direct, within within an hour to the city or whatever it might be. Do you think that helps?
I think it's huge. I think it's absolutely huge. And I think if you look to the US, particularly the West Coast, look at Twitter, Facebook, other big tech Palo Alto firms saying there's no need to come into the office ever again. We're going to have home-based working by default, and you can live anywhere. And I think in terms of our relation to work and how we understand the difference between the communities where we choose to live and the sectors where we choose to work, I think that's going to be fundamentally changing. I also think, perversely, that areas, particularly like South Yorkshire, that even across a northern comparison, they're not Leeds and they're not Manchester. We don't have the AA grade office space that those places have. But I think that, bizarrely, that lack of investment may prove to allow us to win, I guess, in the end, because the whole model of a working environment is changing. So we don't know what people will need in the future, but I heavily suspect that it's not that high density of incredibly expensive office space that certainly exists in London, and also exists, as far as we're concerned, here in Leeds and in Manchester. So it gives us an opportunity to think, is it now time to design the cityscape and the urbanscape for future? And is it more important now to talk about superfast broadband than it is to talk about Northern Powerhouse Rail? I mean, even 6 months ago, the only story about levelling up and the Northern Powerhouse was about the needs for HS3 and that intercity connection, certainly across the M62 corridor, but also incorporating places like Newcastle as well as the HS2 connection to London. Now, the dust hasn't settled yet, I think, in terms of our understanding of big infrastructure build. But I'd be really surprised if the billions that were about to be driven into Northern Powerhouse Rail in particular aren't now better spent on different types of connectivity and giving people like my kids the opportunity to genuinely do a high value, traditionally London-based job from the suburbs of Sheffield.
Yep. And be paid in the same way as well for it.
Well, you'd think so. I mean, I know that some of the big social media companies are looking at differential pay depending on where you live, which is fascinating in itself. But to be honest, I think there's a fair point there that if you don't have to live in Zone 2, then you probably don't need the same kind of wages. But I'd hate them to take that to the limit of saying, well, actually, we're going to pay, minimum wage if you happen to live in some parts of Sheffield compared to in Chelsea. But we'll see.
Yeah, indeed. So what do you do, in terms of your role? Let's talk a little bit about, your data. How would you describe your CEO role? How would you describe what you do for the network?
Yeah, I think it's, how would I describe it? For me, the reason I love this job so much is it's enabled me to shape it into the things that I love doing most. And a lot of that is about, two things really: connecting with people and working with staff. And I think the thing I've loved most about being chief executive has been the shift from having a functional role to do as formerly as commercial director, and being able to say, actually, do you know what, my job is to make everyone happy and then get out of their way. And I've really, really loved that. We spent a lot of time in our organisation working on culture. We're doing pretty well, even in the COVID environment. Our intense concern has been about the well-being of staff, and that side of the job for me has really just, magnified my passion for it. And then the other side is just connections and trying to make opportunities. And it comes back to how I've kind of grown up in the NHS, but recognizing that the power of networks, the power of connectivity, the power of being able to bring opportunity in and say yes, say yes, we can, and we'll work out a way of doing it. That's kind of my role. I'm kind of a glorified director of business development again, really, because it's about going out there and saying what makes us better, what makes us stronger, what does Yorkshire want. And I think that kind of place-based leadership, that kind of being able to just unashamedly bang the drum for Yorkshire and Humber and say, what's good for Yorkshire and Humber is good for my YHAHSN. And so what is it we can win? What inward investment can we bring? How can we get government to look more favourably on us here? The whole piece of work we did very recently about levelling up Yorkshire and Humber, trying to demonstrate the kind of investment that would help us in a post-COVID or living with COVID type of world. So that's my kind of job is connecting and then trying to keep the staff happy.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting that you can use that, trying to keep staff happy. And so I'll ask you around leadership. What do you feel good leadership means?
I think so. I think Robert Greenleaf, servant leadership. I think that's the kind of leadership I've always aspired to. So how, your job is to go in there and work out what it is your team needs to be successful in the way that they're doing it, and to reward them appropriately for doing so. And I think that for me is at the heart of leadership, and both on a macro level in terms of, I suppose, organizational culture, but also in terms of having time to have conversations and talk to individuals. And I'm a massive fan of a professor at Leeds University called Beverly Alamo Metcalf. And when I was on the grad scheme, I turned down 3 months abroad, because at the time I did the grad scheme, you were still allowed to kind of have a 3-month placement internationally. And I chose to do mine in Leeds, which isn't very international, is it? But the reason I did it was because I wanted to work with Beverly, and her work on transformational leadership really spoke to me. And what Beverly says, and I'm hoping I'm not giving away her secret sauce here, but basically the fruits of her work are, her research shows that she believes there's 13 separate elements to what makes a transformational leader. But those 13 elements in and of themselves have different weightings. So if the 13 things make up 100% of the whole, then there's one of those elements in Beverly's research that makes up 60% alone.
Oh, wow.
And that element is showing concern for staff. So I was kind of, learned at Beverly's feet really for 3 months, and continued to kind of have this kind of leadership philosophy kind of through me. And really the chief exec role has been my attempt to try and practice what you preach, or kind of put your money where your mouth is and say, so that's the thing. If that's the thing that transformational leadership is all about, then let's see what it looks like. And that can be done on a daily basis. It's not about the grand gesture. It's about the small things. It's about talking to people about their day. It's about remembering to check in with how they're really doing, and not just pay lip service to those kind of conversations.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it's about saying to yourself as a leader, this isn't an extra thing to do. This is the job that you do. The job that you do is to be able to make sure that your staff are okay, and then everything else will take care of itself.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And having that, you can't do it all on your own, right? So you have to have your staff into, they're the ones that they are the ones that are going to achieve your vision ultimately, or the combined vision for the organization. But yeah, no, I love that philosophy. So I think my last question then to you will be, you've got a role with pressure and probably quite heavy on your time and so on and so forth. So what do you do to unwind and relax?
I need to be very truthful on this one, don't I? And just admit that I'm not doing whatever I'm doing. I'm not doing very well. I mean, so what I do, so not watch Sheffield Wednesday, I think is definitely high. I really enjoyed the football pausing during lockdown, and just having Saturday afternoons to myself when my blood pressure didn't just boil was pretty good this year. So that's
give up. Just give up. Just stop. Oh, no, just stop doing it.
Never. I love playing golf. I mentioned that earlier. I love playing golf, and one of the things I love about it the most is it's probably, I'm not brilliant by any means, if not brilliant at all. But it's 4 hours of switching off. No phones, no distractions. It's a place where I'm actually able to completely focus my entire attention at the game, and that for me is really important. But apart from that, I try. I mean, obviously, the usual things that a dad of two would say is, there's not much free time, is there? But the kids and my wife give me an awful lot of pleasure and relaxation. I'm trying to be better at this. I'm trying to lead by example and think more about work-life balance. I think that's particularly hard in a time of COVID. I think that's particularly hard when you're chained to a desk on Teams 10, 12 hours a day and no breaks.
Yeah.
But you kind of got to say, and this is what I'm trying to say to myself, this is how we are. This is it. You can't wait for it to change. This is how we are. So you're going to have to do things differently. And for me, what I'm trying to get into is more around kind of mindfulness and meditation. I've been really lucky as a member of the NHS to be given access to things like the Headspace app and other things like that. So I'm very much trying to make that part of my practice on a daily basis rather than something that I do when I'm feeling stressed. And then similarly, I think with exercise as well, trying to make exercise part of your daily or weekly routine. And I can't say that I'm succeeding here, but that's my goal. I think the things I find quite difficult at the moment are things like being home-based. And although I'm lucky enough to have a home office, you don't separate it perhaps as much as you would if the office was 20 miles up the motorway. So it's a work in progress for me. But I do find that the strategy of having things in your diary that force you to turn your attention elsewhere, those are the kind of things that work for me. Yeah. So when I've got a different job to do in the evening, when I've got to take my son to football practice, whatever it may be, means that you have no choice but to say, this is what I'm doing now. If I leave those spaces empty, I find that work starts to invade.
Yeah.
And so trying to deliberately give myself non-work things to do, I think is my coping mechanism at the moment. But for me, but as I said, longer term, it's got to be about mindfulness. It's got to be about exercise. But any tips, I'll be gratefully received. Yeah.
Well, no, so when lockdown started, do you remember the 5K, donate 5? So I'd went out for my first run there, and then I'd done it for a period. I really enjoyed it, hit like a goal that I was trying to hit with like a 5K time, and then stopped again.
Yeah.
And it was just like, and actually you feel yourself become less productive, less motivated. You're still doing the work, but you're not enjoying it as much. And I've gone back in the last couple of weeks. I've started this running program again that I was doing before. I've got a friend that's like a running coach. And again, I've started it and I just feel, like this morning went out for a 6K run, and I just feel it just gives you so much energy. It gives you so much, there's something that Joe Wick said on the podcast, the body coach. And he said, the motivation is waiting for you at the end of your run or the end of your exercise. And it's the pot of gold that you receive after, because you never feel bad after you finish it, a run or exercise. And it fills you and you have that rush of endorphins and so on and so forth. So for me, I've definitely noticed a change in my attitude, mood and productiveness since I've been getting back into my exercise routine. So yeah, but Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on. It's been really, really good to get to know the person behind the job title.
Thanks, Jack. Enjoyed it. Nice to see you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to that episode of the P&E podcast. If you like what you heard, please make sure that you share this episode via your social media channels, as it really does help us to gain traction in promoting this podcast series. Please make sure that you also subscribe to the channel that you're listening via, as you'll then get notifications as soon as we release our next podcast episode. Thank you.